How could someone abduct not one, but two girls at the same time?
My sister couldn't protect me. There was some boogeyman out there that would take both of us.
There was no explanation. There was very little hope.
Everyone knew about the case of the Lyon sisters.
On March 25th, 1975, 12-year-old Sheila Lyon and her 10-year-old sister Catherine walked from their home to Wheaton Plaza Mall in Montgomery County, Maryland, to see Easter decorations and get a bite to eat. They were never seen again. The disappearance of the Lyon sisters, the daughters of a popular radio broadcaster, shocked the nation's capital and led to a search for answers. The Lyon sisters have never been found, but later this year a man goes on trial for their murders.
The abduction of Sheila and Catherine Lyon over 40 years ago has haunted this community. We're finally able to start answering the questions of what happened in April of 1975.
But after more than 40 years, investigators still don't have all the answers about how two young girls could be snatched from what was then quiet suburbia. They're still trying to learn who robbed a family of its children and a community of its sense of security. I'm Neil Augenstein. This is The Investigation Continues, an investigative podcast from WTOP. Over the next 5 episodes, we'll examine the disappearance of Catherine and Sheila Lyon in March of 1975. We'll look at the clues and evidence that investigators pursued, and in some cases missed, as they searched for the two sisters. A search that resulted in an indictment for the Lyon sisters' murders, even though their bodies have never been recovered. A crime that upended a family and brought fear to all who heard the story. A story still in need of a final chapter. About a week after her daughters Sheila and Catherine disappeared, Mary Lyon invited Washington Star reporter Marianne Kuhn into her kitchen. She told her about what had been going on the day her daughters vanished.
Well, they were on Easter vacation, and Mrs. Lyon was drinking coffee, as usual, and the girls had made, just cereal and toast. Mary Lyon, the mother, didn't want the girls to disturb their father, who was sleeping. He was up all night doing a WMAL radio show. So it was decided that the girls would go to nearby Wheaton Plaza.
You'd never met the girls before, right?
No, unfortunately, I never had met them. But from what people told me, they were both blonde-haired, and Kate, the youngest one, was sort of the silly one and the outgoing one, while Sheila, the oldest, was quiet. Well, Sheila was the cook and the honor roll student at Newport Junior High School, an artist, a bowler. She was just starting to take babysitting jobs, and her secret ambition was to be a cheerleader. And Kate liked to garden, play volleyball, roller skate, read books, and run. They shared a bedroom with twin beds. It was quite feminine and beautiful, with yellow walls and pink and white flowers on a vanity. There were posters above each of the girls' beds. Over Sheila's bed was a poster of John Denver, and over Kate's was one of Loggins and Messina. And I remember there was a soft breeze coming through the window, and they had very sheer white curtains that were just stirring a little bit. And I thought how normal and beautiful this was. Sheila was wearing a navy blue sweatshirt and jeans. They were wheat-colored, and tennis shoes. And Kate had on Wrangler blue jeans, a bright gold turtleneck, and a red knit jacket and brown shoes.
And so what was the plan for that afternoon?
Well, Mrs. Lyon had suggested that they go to the Orange Bowl, and that was one of the favorite places for the girls. And Kate had complained that a slice of pizza used to be 40 cents, and now it's 45 cents. The girls were given an allowance for doing different chores, and Mrs. Lyon didn't give them any money to go up to the plaza. And they had about $4 to go to spend on pizza and whatever. Sheila and Kate walked out the front door together, and they went down the flagstone path that was there, out the chain link gate, and down a wooded path. on the way to Wheaton Plaza, which was not that far from their home, a 10-minute walk.
You wrote that it was really busy at Wheaton Plaza that day since it was Easter and it was a beautiful sunny day. A clerk at Up Against the Wall remembered that the sisters came in and looked around. At another store, Sheila had picked up a leather wallet and showed it to Kate. The Orange Bowl was packed that day. By the end of the day, they'd sold 2,400 slices.
Their older brother, Jay, who was in 9th grade at the time, saw them over by this big Easter bunny display in the center of the plaza. And, he walked past them, and they saw him, he said, but they didn't talk to him.
And it turns out he was one of the last people to see the girls. As you sat there that day with Mary Lyon, did you get the sense that she really believed that her daughters would be coming home?
Yes, I do think they were hopeful. In fact, Mrs. Lyon said that when the girls come home, Kate can get her ears pierced and Sheila can wear eyeshadow, and they'll get their Easter baskets that have been sitting by the fireplace.
16 before 11 o'clock on WMAL. Tom Gager with the 4 lads on a Wednesday morning in Washington.
Wherever we go. We owned the city as far as radio went. WMAL was right then in the midst of its salad days of being number one in the market.
Tom Gager was the midday host at WMAL. Sheila and Kate's father, John Lyon, was a popular personality there.
Yeah, 10 before 1 o'clock, John Lyon, here from WMAL. It's almost better than...
He was always very cheerful on the air. John is probably the most flexible broadcaster I've ever known. He could sing, he could entertain, he was a good disc jockey, and he loved to appear with his band. It's called the Gross National Product. I think it was 4 or 5 guys, and they did concerts all the time. We were all out in the community all the time.
But that changed after March 25th.
They told us that John's daughters had been kidnapped. That's all we knew.
When word came out that Catherine and Sheila had gone missing, it sucked the air out of not just WMAL radio, but of the entire metro area, especially, of course, Montgomery County.
At the time, Gary Reels was a reporter with WMAL.
This was the first time anything like this happened. And the worst part about it, Neil, was it was so dark. It was so frightening. And there was no explanation for their disappearance. There was very little hope.
What had happened to Kate and Sheila Lyon? 4 hours after their daughters were supposed to be home, the Lyons were getting worried. They called the girls' closest friends and neighbors. Nobody had seen them. John Lyon picked up the kitchen phone and dialed 911. A dispatch went out to car 412 to get a report on 2 missing persons. Within 10 minutes, 2 Montgomery County police officers were at the front step of the Lyon home. As soon as the Lyons told him what happened, Officer James Machado said he could tell the Lyon sisters hadn't run away. He told a reporter he tried to soft-pedal his concern to console John and Mary Lyon. He told them even good kids are capable of doing strange things.
The first time I heard about it was actually on the radio.
In 1975, WTOP's Chris Core worked at WMAL with John Lyon, who came on the air the next day.
He had called into the morning show, the Hardin and Weaver show, the most listened to show in Washington, and he was saying, look, I'm sure we're going to feel stupid about this. They probably told us that they were having a sleepover or something, and we just can't remember, but I just, if anybody knows where they are, let us know, send them home. And at that point, sure they were concerned, but they kept thinking, well, obviously we just forgot that they had this sleepover or something like that.
While the Lyon family held out hope, Montgomery County Police realized 2 young girls, 12-year-old Sheila and 10-year-old Kate Lyon, had disappeared.
There were never any good evidence-based leads in this case. There was never any evidence back at Wheaton Plaza or anywhere between the plaza and the Lyons home.
You're looking in dumpsters, you're looking at trash cans to see if maybe the child's possessions, glasses, a purse, clothing had been disposed of in that way.
Clint Van Zandt is a retired FBI profiler. He says the first hours after a child disappears are crucial.
When you do an investigation like that, it's almost like a target on a bullseye. You start at that very center of that target. In this case, the mall, or where they were last seen allegedly walking down the street, perhaps getting into a car. And then you take that bullseye and you start expanding away from the center of the target. And you move out a few feet, and you move out a few hundred yards, and then you move out a mile, then you move out 2 miles. And you're expanding and expanding. It's just like somebody throws a rock into a pond of water and those ripples start going out. Well, that investigative circles have to start moving out too.
Police knew that several people inside Wheaton Plaza had seen the girls there in the early afternoon. Sometime between 2:30 and 3, a man named James Mann was standing outside his home here near the corner of Drum Avenue and Devon Place, a few blocks from the plaza. He waved to the girls as they walked past, and they continued toward McComas Avenue. This was the last confirmed sighting of Sheila and Catherine Lyon. Next time on The Investigation Continues.
Police put out a composite sketch of a man in his 50s trying to coax girls into talking with him into a microphone.
I'm Neil Augenstein. The Investigation Continues is a production of WTOP. You'll find other episodes on WTOP.com, iTunes, and Podcast One. Thanks for joining. We'll see you here next week. I'm Neil Augenstein. This is a special episode of The Investigation Continues. It's being posted on March 25th, 2017. Today is exactly 42 years since 12-year-old Sheila and 10-year-old Catherine Lyon disappeared in Montgomery County, Maryland. On Monday, we'll get back to the story about what happened before and after the Lyon sisters were last seen at Wheaton Plaza Mall. But today, we'll look at what it was like to try to find the two missing girls, and we'll examine how the challenge has changed over the years.
The public's knowledge and law enforcement's, even their experience involving abducted children, was very limited back in 1975.
That's Robert Lowery. He's the Vice President of the Missing Children Division for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Child abduction like this in of itself is extremely rare, and extremely rare even today. But the public's appreciation, or at least their knowledge and awareness of this situation, was very minimal. The fact is, these kind of things didn't happen in most communities, and we all really believed that we were immune. But the fact of the matter is that when something like what happened to Sheila and Catherine occurred, it really changed your community, and you no longer felt safe in your home. You kept your children at a closer, and you were starting to lock their doors. In 1975, many communities, we didn't even lock our doors. So it really did change us as communities and as a culture.
Now, there are lots of resources to help in finding missing children, but back then there wasn't one place to learn about missing kids.
Sadly, back in 1975, no, there was not a national clearinghouse. In fact, we didn't come into existence until in 1984 here at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. But back in 75, the responsibility for searching for the child, which still is true today, does rest with the local law enforcement agency that responds. Communications with the public, it isn't like it is today with the advent of the internet, 24-hour news stations, our ability now with cell phones to reach the public through internet and messaging, through our smartphones. None of those things exist. And of course, there was no Amber Alert back in 1975. And the other problem would be is that even back in 75, there was no real place that was a depository of information regarding missing children. And with our country, with the most fragmented system of law enforcement, with over 18,000 agencies across the nation, communications is difficult even today, but it was much more cumbersome back in 1975. So what may have happened in Montgomery County would not necessarily, can we assume, that even maybe in Washington, D.C., or maybe some of the Virginia counties would even be aware that this had happened until some information was actually broadcast on the news.
That was a very different time.
That's Jill Harrington. Her daughter Morgan was 20 years old in 2009 when she was abducted from the campus of University of Virginia while attending a Metallica concert. She was later murdered. Jill and her husband Dan formed Help Save the Next Girl, a group that helps promote personal safety for girls and young women. She says that things were very different when the Lyon sisters vanished.
If someone went missing, you started mimeographing. Remember purple mimeographing information and going door to door or nailing posters of your missing person, to stop signs and telephone poles, and even the replication of the images was laborious and difficult to broadcast widely.
Over the years, child and safety advocates have tried new ways to help find missing children.
Well, the milk container program actually was started by some dairies out of the Midwest, and they were looking for ways that they might help finding missing or abducted children. The fact is that even though that's probably something that we most remember about our efforts to find missing children, it was something that really didn't last very long. My understanding was maybe 6 or 8 months is about the length of time that the pictures of children were actually placed on milk cartons. Eton Pates being one of the first. And the reason it wasn't very successful was the fact that milk cartons sit on kitchen tables, and it doesn't necessarily reach the audience that we're looking for, which would be the parents or older siblings. Typically it's the children sitting at the breakfast table eating their cereal would be the ones actually having a clear visible view of the information about the missing child or the image. So even though it was a well-intended, and I think it was our start to recognize that we need to engage the public when children are missing, it was not as successful as some folks may have thought.
In 2009, when Morgan Harrington disappeared, there was a whole new set of tools available to help in the search.
It was very different. I personally am not technologically adept, but the infrastructure and the technology was there, and other people leapt to the forefront and helped us find a way to access it. Immediately, we had a social media presence. We disseminated Morgan's image and story widely online. We really got a wide swath of bandwidth quickly.
Jill and Dan Harrington decided to be very public about the search for their daughter, knowing it would mean an invasion of privacy in their lives and the life of their missing daughter.
Neil, we had lost control of our very lives. Our privacy was a small matter to consider. Desperate times demand desperate responses, and we were desperate to find our daughter. We really didn't care about privacy. We did understand that it does open some vulnerability, but that was really so far down the list of importance that we kept forging ahead. We were singularly focused on finding Morgan, and then once her body had been recovered, on finding the person who killed her before he killed somebody else.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Jesse Matthew, the man who killed Morgan Harrington, also killed University of Virginia student Hannah Graham. Jesse Matthew is now serving life in prison. Eventually, another young girl will disappear.
I think that there are in place now very good tools for us here in Virginia as well as nationally with a step-by-step guide and template. Contact law enforcement, contact National Missing and Exploited Children, and they can walk you through things like don't contaminate the missing person's living space and bedroom because you may need them for a source for DNA submissions. 2 things for missing adults. Check on their bank activity. Make sure the pets are being fed. Look at their phone activity. Put information out through traditional as well as social media that this person is being looked for. Gather recent photos that really are representative of what your loved one looks like at the time they have gone missing.
When it comes to finding missing children, our strongest and most effective tool is engagement of the public, making them aware of the child being missing, sharing images of the child, and essentially making them the eyes and ears of law enforcement. We encourage, when we send out pictures and images of missing children, we encourage people to call 911 to report any sightings so that the law enforcement can respond quickly and determine whether this is the child or not. And this has brought more children home today than ever before. Amber Alert, now we're able not only share information about the missing child, we're able to share information about potential abductors or who was seen taking the child. And that really has curbed the number of abductions that we used to see here in our country to a very minimal number that we see today.
At the end of April 29th, Governor McAuliffe has designated that day as Virginia Missing Persons Day. It's the first annual, which is nice to bring attention to some of these missing cases, and we will have a vigil for families, but we are also offering families the opportunity to submit familial DNA free of charge into the national databanks. Morgan was missing in 2009, and even since then in Virginia, we have increased the arsenal of tools for law enforcement to use. Virginia uses mitochondrial DNA for forensic assays. Dan lobbied the General Assembly here for familial DNA to be used in Virginia. We were the third state to use it. When the Lyon sisters went missing, there was no DNA technology. We are not far from a time when we will be beyond familial DNA and mitochondrial DNA. I've seen information that we should be able to derive pretty accurate representative facial structures and sketches from DNA that is recovered from a crime scene. That's a whole new world. Unfortunately, it didn't exist for the Lyon sisters.
The Investigation Continues is an investigative podcast from WTOP. You can hear the entire series at WTOP.com. Search podcasts. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Podcast One, where you'll be notified of new episodes as the case moves forward. Remember, Episode 2 will be available Monday. I'm Neil Augenstein. Thanks for listening. Previously on The Investigation Continues.
Sheila and Kate walked out the front door together.
Then they told us that John's daughters had been kidnapped.
You're looking in dumpsters, you're looking at trash cans.
It sucked the air out of the entire metro area.
In March 1975, 12-year-old Sheila Lyon and her 10-year-old sister Catherine vanished after spending a few hours at the Wheaton Plaza Mall in Montgomery County, Maryland. The disappearance of the daughters of a popular local radio personality shocked the area and instilled fear in parents and their children. Now, more than 40 years later, a man will soon go on trial for their murders, even though their bodies have never been recovered.
What happened to Sheila and Catherine Lyon?
I'm Neil Augenstein. This is The Investigation Continues, an investigative podcast from WTOP. The disappearance and search for two young sisters stretched more than 4 decades. It included dramatic developments and missed opportunities and led to an indictment for their murders. What did happen to the Lyon sisters?
There are several crimes that have happened in our city over the years that have been so impactful, they have changed the way we live. And the disappearance of the Lyon sisters is one of those crimes.
Pat Collins was the reporter in the Washington area in 1975 when 12-year-old Sheila and 10-year-old Catherine Lyon disappeared from the Wheaton Plaza Mall.
The way we lived back in 1975, particularly in suburbia, is that we had these shopping malls. It was a place where teenagers would hang out. It gave teenagers and young people a place they could socialize. Hey, Mom, I'm going to the mall. That's okay, Pat. Just make sure you're home for dinner. The mall was a magnet for young people. It's where you could see the new fashion. Remember records? They actually had records and music stores back then, and you could find out, who was in the top 10. You could, hang out with people, not only from your school, but from other schools. It was a great little melting pot of society for young people. And since there were a lot of kids there, it seemed an okay thing to do. And that's the way a lot of families and a lot of kids lived their lives in the 70s. And parents thought it was safe until that day.
These were two girls together, two sisters who had just disappeared.
To hear of girls a little bit older than me getting kidnapped, I remember our parents talking to us about it, about not getting into cars with people. I just remember it having a huge effect on me. It was sort of that boogeyman story that we had in that area.
A story that's weighed heavily on people for more than 40 years. Catherine and Sheila Lyon had walked to the Wheaton Plaza Mall one afternoon during their Easter vacation in 1975. They never returned home. Montgomery County Police were certain the Lyon sisters hadn't run away. They interviewed family, friends, and people who saw the girls in the mall that afternoon of March 25th.
Darlene is a girl who knew the Lyon sisters, was at Wheaton Plaza the day they disappeared.
Reporter Anna March interviewed the girl who she called Darlene. Darlene had seen a young man, maybe in his 20s, who'd been leering at the sisters in the mall.
Yeah, she had seen him talking to the girls. I believe the way she phrased it to me was that she had a bad feeling about it. It was creepy. He was too close to them. She didn't say anything to the girls, but she said to him, take a picture, it lasts longer, because he was staring at them. And she said, I knew there was something wrong with him, and I knew he was a creep.
On March 27th, 2 days after the Lyon sisters disappeared, Montgomery County Police asked for Darlene's help in putting together a composite sketch.
They sent a police car for her to bring her in to make the sketch. She lived with her mom, and her mom was at work, and they sent a police car, brought her in. She gave the information. The detective drew the sketch, and that was it. She said it was a pretty easy process for her to give the information.
The sketch showed a white man about 5'11", 140 pounds, late teens or early 20s. The man had long hair, acne, and scars on his left cheek. But Darlene wasn't the only person who'd seen Kate and Sheila at the mall before they vanished.
Well, there was a 13-year-old teenager who lived near the Lyons, and he was at the mall at the same time Kate and Sheila were there, and he provided Montgomery County Police with a description of a man he saw, 50 to 60 years of age. He saw this man talking to Sheila and Kate.
Washington Star reporter Marianne Kuhn talked with that witness.
Well, we named him Jimmy. It's not his real name, but police wanted to keep his identity a secret, and his parents were fearful of retaliation, and they asked that his real name not be used. He said it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was out with a friend, and they were near the People's Drugstore and the Orange Bowl pizza carryout, and the two girls were talking to a man with a tape recorder. And he said he heard the man ask a question, "Are any of you two involved in sports?"
Jimmy told her the man was sitting on a ledge in the outdoor portion of Wheaton Plaza talking to the girls.
He said that he thought the man was some kind of a reporter, and he was joking with his friends that maybe they ought to go over there and ask him to interview them.
But the conversation didn't last long.
He said the girls went in one direction, and the man with the tape recorder walked in another direction towards Montgomery Ward's. And the girls were walking the other way toward the fountain.
Jimmy provided a description to the same detective that created the composite based on Darlene's recollections. Soon after, Montgomery County Police made the sketch of Jimmy's suspect public.
Police put out a composite sketch of a man in his 50s.
Reporter Gary Reels.
A man in his 50s, a well-dressed man, a neat-looking man, gray-haired, who apparently over a period of time in those days around March and April of 75 was seen not just at Wheaton Plaza, but over at Iverson Mall in Prince George's County, trying to coax girls into talking with him into a microphone and apparent cassette recorder that he may have had.
As soon as that sketch was released, police were flooded with calls from people who were sure they'd seen that man in his 50s trying to get girls to speak into his tape recorder.
And very quickly, the composite sketch of Tape Recorder Man became iconic with the investigation. A nice-looking, well-dressed, gray-haired gentleman appearing type of fellow.
But the sketch of the man who Darlene had seen was never made public. It turns out the detective who drew it told his supervisors he didn't think it was a very good likeness and suggested not making it public because it would generate false leads.
She trusted the police. She said she didn't doubt the police along the way. She said, well, they must have their reason. They must know something. They must have some reason to know it was this other guy, the tape recorder man.
Right after the sketch of Tape Recorder Man was made public, a local man told a security guard at Wheaton Plaza he'd been there at the plaza the day the Lyon sisters disappeared. The witness said he saw the girls getting into a car with a man who looked like the composite sketch, and they all drove away. The witness was given a lie detector test, but failed it. Police figured he was just trying to get the $9,000 reward that was out there for help in solving the case. And others were out to profit from the tragedy. People called the Lyon homes saying they'd seen the girls. One male caller demanded John Lyon leave a briefcase with $10,000 cash inside the bathroom of an Annapolis, Maryland courthouse. Lyon left the money, but nobody ever picked it up. The man reportedly called the next day and said police had surrounded the courthouse so he couldn't get the money. He said he'd be back in touch, but never contacted the family again. Meanwhile, police and the public continued to look for any evidence connected with the disappearance of Sheila and Catherine Lyon. Scuba divers had searched this pond next to a nursing home a few blocks from Wheaton Plaza. Sewer drains were checked. Police asked for permission to search crawl spaces in nearby homes. On a tip from a psychic, National Guardsmen and police combed miles of parkland in Montgomery County. Nothing was found.
John and Mary, God bless them, they were out there for days and weeks with the search, still hoping against hope, because they knew whatever it was not good.
And as happens in all cases of missing children, Montgomery County Police investigated John and Mary Lyon.
One of the things you want to do very quickly is to be able to rule out anything other than, unfortunately, foul play.
Retired FBI profiler Clint Van Zandt.
We have to look at the parents in every case like that to see if there's a parental involvement, if there's anyone else nearby.
Police did quickly clear those who knew the Lyon sisters.
The leads dried up rather quickly because I don't think anybody had a good sighting of these two young girls beyond Wheaton Plaza that afternoon.
So as days turned into months, the only good lead was the description of Tape Recorder Man.
If you have a sketch, if you have a description of a suspect, obviously that's what you're going to run with, but that has to be balanced. If you go back to the D.C. sniper, we know we had a description of this white van allegedly the shooters were in. Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. Every white van in this area had been stopped and the occupants proned out on I-95. And, of course, that turned out erroneous.
But did Montgomery County Police have any more to look into? Catherine and Sheila Lyon had just disappeared. There was no physical evidence to recover at Wheaton Plaza. Police had talked to everyone who saw the girls that day. Nobody had come forward to identify Tape Recorder Man. John and Mary Lyon and their other children still had no answers. All they knew was that Sheila and Kate had never come home. Searches turned up nothing, and while Montgomery County Police vowed to find out what happened to the Lyon sisters, they admitted they were no further along in their investigation than the day the girls disappeared. But that was about to change. Next, on The Investigation Continues.
There was a gent locked up, convicted of child sex crimes down in North Carolina.
The Investigation Continues is an investigative podcast from WTOP. You can hear the entire 5-part series at WTOP.com. Search podcasts. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Podcast One. Thanks for listening. We'll see you here next week. I'm Neil Augenstein. Previously on The Investigation Continues.
We had these shopping malls. It was a place where teenagers would hang out.
These were two girls together, two sisters who had just disappeared.
He was staring at them, and she said, I knew there was something wrong with him, and I knew he was a creep.
A nice-looking, well-dressed, gray-haired gentleman, appearing type of fellow.
Sheila and Catherine Lyon had walked from their home to Wheaton Plaza Mall during Easter vacation of 1975. They did some window shopping and had slices of pizza. They never returned home. The disappearance of the 12 and 10-year-old daughters of a popular local radio broadcaster terrorized the nation's capital and frustrated investigators who spent almost 40 years looking for answers. Later this year, a man goes on trial for the murders of the Lyon sisters, but their bodies still have never been found. I'm Neil Augenstein. This is The Investigation Continues, an investigative podcast from WTOP. We're looking at the disappearance of the Lyon sisters, a look at the clues that gave police hope and the opportunities that they missed, the long unsolved disappearance that changed the way people live. Almost 2 weeks after Sheila and Catherine Lyon disappeared from Wheaton Plaza in Montgomery County, Maryland, police got a solid lead. It happened here in Manassas, Virginia, at the intersection of Grant Avenue and Center Street. An IBM employee named Marshall DeYtH was on his way to work that morning. He pulled up at the stoplight. A station wagon was to his left. In the back of the station wagon, he says he saw a little girl, blonde, with gold round metal glasses and blue eyes, bound and gagged. He told police he recognized her. It was 12-year-old Sheila Lyon. The witness told police the driver resembled the man shown in the police composite sketch. He said the car was a 1968 beige Ford station wagon with Maryland tags. The license plate was bent, so he could only see the first 4 letters and numbers. He tried to follow the car, but the driver realized it and sped away. Were the Lyon sisters still alive? That night, after the car description and partial plate were released, members of the public helped in the search for the Lyon girls. Truckers who heard the lookout on CB radio forced beige station wagons to the side of the road and did their own searches. Armed citizens in a car chased one station wagon near a campground at Burke Lake. But the girls weren't found that night, or the next day, or the next.
In my life, if there ever was a profile in courage, it was the fact that John came back to the radio.
Chris Corr and Tom Gager worked with John Lyon at WMAL.
At some point, he wanted to come back to work, and he did. And I think we all sort of held our breath, wondering how on earth is he going to be able to do this? Because the type of show that he did and the type of host that he was, easygoing, laid-back, comfortable guy who's just gone through hell.
We didn't talk about the girls. We did maintain an aura of distance, I guess.
The story seemed to stick around for decades. It would appear on the news from time to time. Maybe they would have a lead or maybe just report on the anniversary of the disappearance.
And it really frightened my mother. If we were shopping and she lost track of me, her panic was at a much higher level. She held us a lot closer after that. And for years, I just remember her saying, I wonder whatever happened to those poor girls.
In the mid-'80s, it became known there was a gent locked up, convicted of child sex crimes down in North Carolina.
Reporter Gary Reels. In March of 1987, 12 years after Sheila and Kate Lyon disappeared, police got their most promising lead.
Fred Coffey had spent several years in the Navy, and he was in the early generation of computer wizardry. And he left the Navy early in 1975, and he moved to Montgomery County in March of 1975, where he took up a position with Vitro Labs there at Aspen Hill and George Avenue. At the time of the Lyon disappearance on March 25th, 75, Fred Coffey had just begun working, settling into his new position at Vitro Labs and his new life in Montgomery County. Of course, he does pretty remarkably resemble the composite sketch of the tape recorder man. Fast forward to August of 1975. Kathy Beatty was found brutally beaten and sexually assaulted in a wooded area behind the 7-Eleven, right across George Avenue from Vitro Labs. When Kathy Beatty was found, she was still alive. She died a couple of days later, but the key point, Neil, is that when she was found, she was still alive. The news reports came out that a young girl was found beaten, critically injured, sexually assaulted, and right at that time, Fred Coffey left his job and moved out of the area. All he knew is the news that the girl was still alive. He left, and he never returned. He moved out of the area and ended up down in North Carolina and the western tip of Virginia. And that is where youngsters ended up being kidnapped, murdered, sexually assaulted. In the 1980s, police up and down the mid-Atlantic and the eastern seaboard investigating open cases, including Montgomery County detectives with the Lyons case, are comparing notes. Let's track this known pedophile, murderer, serial killer, Fred Coffey, and see where he has been. Blinking neon, my God. He was in Aspen Hill, March of 1975. And my God, look at him and look at the composite sketch. They were very, very keenly interested in talking with Fred Coffey.
The 41-year-old is now doing time at the Mecklenburg prison in Charlotte, North Carolina, serving a 50-year sentence for child molestation. He is currently awaiting trial for the murder of a youngster in North Carolina. And according to police, he may be a suspect in 3 to 4 other child murders in North Carolina and Virginia. Coffey is also under investigation for the rape and murder of 15-year-old Kathy Beatty, whose body was found in 1975 in a wooded area behind a 7-Eleven across the street from the Vitro complex. Police believe that Coffey stayed at the Holiday Motel in Gaithersburg when he lived in the area. They are hoping phone calls will fill in the blanks of Coffey's life here more than 10 years ago. They're hopeful this latest lead will help solve the mystery surrounding the disappearance of the Lyon sisters, but they're fairly certain it won't have a happy ending. In Wheaton, Catherine Couric, Channel 4 News.
Everybody wanted to talk with Fred Coffey, but he had been convicted. He was on appeal with his death sentence. He agreed to do an interview pending his lawyer's approval. Surprise, surprise, his lawyer, a law professor, shot that down. Not only did he shoot down an interview with a news reporter, they shot down all approaches by law enforcement. Coffey's death sentence was vacated on appeal, so law enforcement to this day never got to talk with Fred Coffey.
25 years after they disappeared, John and Mary Lyon still had no idea what happened to their daughters.
The year 2000 was a very significant time for them. For 25 years, they could never lose all hope something miraculous might come out. They just didn't know, but they couldn't ever be at ease, at peace. They had no place to go to represent Catherine and Sheila. So about 1999 into 2000, the family made a very significant decision, and they established a memorial in a local cemetery in Kensington for Catherine and Sheila. And that gave them a place to go, to reflect, to pray, to be with the girls. They had no place for 25 years. And it was absolutely heartbreaking. And that gave them, I think, some solace. You talk about peace of mind, closure, and all of this stuff. There is none. It never ends. It will never end for them. But at least establishment of that memorial in the Kensington Cemetery, I think they embraced that, and it became a very cherished place for them.
Years after police got any substantive leads, the Lyon family knew it was possible they'd never know what happened to Kate and Sheila. Police had gone back time and time again, reviewing the few facts they knew about the Lyon disappearance. With each anniversary, police had few clues, only a tragic story with no ending. Until February 11th, 2014.
This case shocked our community in 1975 and has never been forgotten by the police department or anyone who followed the case 39 years ago. Our cold case squad has been able to identify a man who is currently incarcerated as a convicted child sex offender, and we have established that this man was at Wheaton Plaza on that day and may have had contact with the Lyon girls.
Next time on The Investigation Continues. The Investigation Continues is a production of WTOP. You'll find other episodes at WTOP.com. Search podcasts. You can also find us on iTunes and Podcast One. Thanks for joining. We'll see you here next week. I'm Neil Augenstein. Previously on The Investigation Continues.
This man was at Wheaton Plaza on that day and may have had contact with the Lyon girls.
An 18-year-old suspicious-looking fellow had been following the girls around the plaza.
Over the years, there had been a number of leads toward different people. You began to wonder whether this is just one more dead end or whether this is real or not.
On July 15, 2015, almost 4 decades after the Lyon sisters disappeared, Montgomery County Police and prosecutors called a news conference.
Good afternoon. My name is John McCarthy, State's Attorney for Montgomery County, Maryland. On March the 25th, 1975, Catherine Lyon, age 10, and Sheila Lyon, age 12, walked from their home only a few blocks away from where we now stand. At the time, there was a strip shopping center that existed at that location, and the two girls went to the mall to see Easter decorations and to eat lunch. Neither Catherine nor Sheila ever returned home.
The abduction of Sheila and Catherine Lyon has haunted this community and this police department. The men and women of the Montgomery County Police Department have never given up on finding these girls. With today's announcement, we're finally able to start answering the questions: what happened to Sheila and Catherine Lyon?
I'm Neil Augenstein. This is The Investigation Continues, an investigative podcast from WTOP. This is the final of 5 episodes examining the disappearance of Sheila and Catherine Lyon from a shopping mall outside the nation's capital, a mystery that's remained unsolved for almost 40 years. In the next few months, a man will go on trial for the murders of the Lyon sisters, even though their bodies have never been recovered. A year and a half after naming Lloyd Lee Welch as the person of interest in the disappearance of Sheila and Catherine Lyon, Welch was indicted. Montgomery County detectives had interviewed him several times in the Delaware prison, where Welch was serving 29 years for child sex abuse. Welch admitted he'd left Wheaton Plaza in a vehicle with the girls. He said his uncle and cousin were with them. Montgomery County Police Chief Tom Manger was joined at the news conference by the sheriff and prosecutor from a small jurisdiction 210 miles away from Wheaton Plaza.
Let me be clear that these efforts are not finished. The investigation is ongoing. This team continues with a purpose. We're focused on uncovering every fact of this case. And the Montgomery County Police and all of our partners will work to hold every individual responsible who was involved with the abduction and murder of the Lyon sisters, as well as the ongoing conspiracy to conceal these crimes.
The Montgomery County Police Department's Major Crime Unit detectives' search led them to Bedford County, Virginia on Friday afternoon, September the 12th, 2014.
The indictments that were unsealed were two, charging Lloyd Welch Jr. with first-degree felony murder during an abduction with the intent to defile Sheila and Catherine Lyon. Intent to defile means to sexually abuse, exploit, molest. During that abduction, and as a natural consequence of that abduction, Lloyd Welch also committed the first-degree murder of those girls. So the words and the allegation in the charge are that this was a murder during an abduction.
John and Mary Lyon, the parents of Sheila and Kate Lyon, were at the news conference but remained in the shadows.
These are wonderful, wonderful people who have suffered an immeasurable loss. They beg you for their privacy, which was ripped from them for reasons of not their own choosing 40 years ago when their daughters were taken and later murdered. This was not of their choosing. They did not pick to be victims, and they don't pick to be the center, but they would like to have closure. They would like to have closure and know what happened to their daughters and have the people responsible for what happened to them held accountable.
So Lloyd Lee Welch would go on trial for the murders of the Lyon sisters, but the trial would not be in Montgomery County, where the disappearance had traumatized the community for almost 40 years. Lloyd Welch will go on trial in a courthouse in tiny Bedford, Virginia, population 6,000.
I think there are multiple jurisdictions that have some claim to this matter. We've made a decision that this was the best way to start this matter. This does not mean that other jurisdictions could not bring charges. We've talked to John and Mary. They know exactly why we're doing it this way. I think they understand it, and they are sympathetic to our rationales. And I think that, again, this is the best thing we think in our judgment for this case.
But since the bodies of Kate and Sheila Lyon have never been found, would prosecutors be able to make a murder case against Lloyd Lee Welch?
It is difficult. Typically, in a homicide, you have an autopsy and you have a body, and you can prove what the cause and mechanism of death is. In a no-body murder case, you have to prove that they are in fact dead, and you have to prove the agent by which they died. Knowing the girls, and we have access to the Lyons family, and we know what Catherine and Sheila were like, what fine young children they were. We know the fact that they did not return home that day was because they were prevented from returning home. These were wonderful, wonderful, naive, beautiful children.
But now, with the unsealing of the indictment, came the ugly details of what investigators believe happened to the Lyon sisters.
Lloyd Welch's indictments charge him with the culpability of the murder of the Lyon sisters because they were killed in order for their captors to escape detection.
Bedford County Sheriff Mike Brown.
The motive for the abduction of the Lyon sisters was to sexually exploit, abuse, and defile them. The Bedford County Sheriff's Office will also continue to focus its investigative efforts on identifying and bringing to justice those individuals who added or assisted in this horrible crime. Richard Welch remains a person of interest in this case. Lloyd Welch has informed investigators that the Lyon sisters were taken so that it could be sexually exploited by him and Richard Welch. Lloyd Welch also states that he observed Richard Welch sexually assaulting one of the Lyon sisters at Richard Welch's residence shortly after the children's abduction.
Engaging in those types of activities with at least one of the victims, obviously that is going to make Richard Welch a person who we are very interested in.
Bedford County Prosecutor Randy Krantz.
And he remains and will be a primary focus as we move forward now that Lloyd Welch has been charged. The last thing that I would say, those that have been involved in the actual crimes or in the recent cover-ups, obstruction, non-cooperation, here's what I would say. Examine your conscience. We have rallied together to bring a league of justice, every resource we have to bear on this case. But to be ultimately and finally successful, we still need the help of citizens of good conscience who have information. It is easy now to ask, why if somebody knew something back in 40 years ago, they didn't come forward? That's a very reasonable question. We have asked those questions. A lawyer once said that all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
So what was the conspiracy that prosecutors and police were alluding to? Lloyd Welch had accused his uncle of sexually abusing one of the Lyon sisters in the basement of his home in Hyattsville, Maryland, in the days after Sheila and Kate disappeared. He said it happened in a locked basement room, a room that only his uncle Richard Welch had the key to. But that uncle hadn't been charged. He still hasn't been charged. Prosecutors believe that the Lyon sisters ended up here, in Thaxton, Virginia, on this property on Taylor Mountain Road. Connie Akers lived in this house in 1975. Her mother, Lizzie, was the owner. Lizzie was also the sister of Richard Welch. In 2014, after Lloyd Welch had been named the person of interest in the Lyon case, Connie Akers told her story to investigators. In spring of 1975, Lloyd Welch and his girlfriend had arrived unexpectedly here on Taylor's Mountain. Lloyd Welch had a duffel bag containing bloody clothing. He asked Connie to wash the clothes, but she refused. Welch said he'd been carrying ground beef in the bag, which had gone bad. Connie's brother Henry Parker told investigators in 2014 that he was there too when Lloyd Welch's station wagon showed up on Taylor's Mountain. Parker told investigators his cousin Lloyd had 2 green Army-style duffel bags. Each one weighed between 60 and 70 pounds. Parker said the bags had reddish-brown stains. He said they smelled of death. At the time, Parker had heard his cousin Lloyd was running from the law and was supposed to have 2 girls with him. Parker said he helped Lloyd Welch throw those bloody duffel bags onto a fire that was burning, a fire that burned for several days. People who lived here on Taylor's Mountain in 1975 still remember the smell that hung over this property for several days. They described it as cremation. A multi-jurisdictional grand jury was set up down here in Bedford and up in Montgomery County. 3 Welch family members were charged with perjury or obstruction.
There are people that are throwing us roadblocks constantly that are trying to lead us in other directions. I'll be honest with you, there's good folks here in Bedford County, Virginia. I believe there's someone out there that knows a lot more that they've shared. I believe they're waiting for the right reason to come forward and share what they know. So that we can continue to fill in the facts of this case.
Lloyd Welch is the only person charged in connection with the murders of Catherine and Sheila Lyon, although his uncle Richard is still officially a person of interest.
We have nothing to hide. My dad has nothing to hide. He has done nothing wrong.
Patricia Ann Welch is the daughter of Richard Welch. She says her cousin Lloyd is determined to drag someone down with him.
Yes, he did do it. I think he did it 100%.
What is it about Lloyd that makes you think that he could be capable of that?
Because Lloyd has done it to other people. Lloyd has molested other kids.
She rejects her cousin's claim that her father abused one one of the Lyon sisters.
And for anybody to say them kids were in that house, I was 8 years old, I would know.
And she's angry it took a grand jury for people on Taylor's Mountain to finally start talking about what they witnessed in 1975.
Go outside the box and get up there on that mountain and do something with the people that was on that mountain that day. I just think it's a real big cover-up of Bedford. It may have started here in Montgomery County, but it ended up there.
Lloyd Welch is set to go on trial in Bedford County, Virginia in September. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. A gag order is now in place, so it's unclear what, if any, physical evidence links Lloyd Welch to the deaths of Sheila and Catherine Lyon. Court records show investigators did find a tooth on Taylor's Mountain, but they don't indicate whether that tooth belongs to one of the sisters. Prosecutors have said they'll call an archaeologist at trial to testify about bones found on the mountain. Lloyd Welch has changed his story several times since being named a person of interest. In May of 2015, Lloyd Welch admitted he saw one of the Lyon girls being killed in the basement of a home. He's called that information his ace in the hole.
I don't know how John and Mary feel about this, but I hope they fry the guy. I cannot imagine a worse crime or a worse individual wandering around able to, commit and apparently get away with the murder of those beautiful young children for this many years.
You mentioned the Lyon sisters case. People nod their head and say, yes, we remember. So this was something that had an enormous impact on this community and the feeling of safety for your children in this community.
In the first hours, it became readily apparent there was nothing good here. It was only bad. And it was a question of what form it would take. And here we are, 42 years later, and we still don't know with any certainty what happened.
I'll leave you with the words, the investigation continues.
The Investigation Continues is an investigative podcast from WTOP. You can hear the entire 5-part series at WTOP.com. Search podcasts. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Podcast One, where you'll be notified of new episodes as the case moves forward. Thanks to Brian Drew, NBC4, the Wheaton Kensington Chamber of Commerce, the Middleton Inn, and you for listening. I'm Neil Augenstein.